Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone watching it. This is Middle East Insights platform, and my name is Dr. Shubhda Chaudhary. And today we are going to talk about a very important aspect, a very important topic, crucial topic, which is Israel's halt of humanitarian aid and support in Gaza. For that, we have Dr. Wesam Amer, who basically is from Gaza. In fact, as of August 2020, he was the Dean of Faculty of Communications and Language at Gaza University. Between February 2016 and February 2019, he was a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Research Fellow. I'm not pronouncing it correctly, I'm sorry. And postdoctoral researcher at School of Arts and Cultures, Newcastle University. The title of his research project was Media Warfare and the Discourse of Islamic Revival, the Case of Islamic State. In 2011, he was Dad Scholar and a PhD student at Graduate School Media and Communication University at Hamburg. And you all should know where Hamburg is. I'm not going to tell you. His doctoral thesis provided a systematic discourse analysis of US and British influential newspapers' coverage of three wars in Middle East and the ways in which the participants in the events are represented in the newspaper. So with this, Shukran Habibi for joining us today. And I am very, very thankful. Our first participant was Dr. Abir from Gaza, and you are our second participant from Gaza, and we are very thankful to you to speak. Right now, Dr. Wesam Amer is at Cambridge University in UK. And with this, I would first like to know that how do you understand this entire context of the halt of humanitarian aid to Gaza right now?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and for having me in your program. From time to time, I follow up the talks and I enjoy and I learn a lot from the meetings you organize. So thank you so much for this opportunity. It's a great honor and a privilege for me to participate in this program. Actually, to answer your question, I have to stress firstly that the situation in Palestine generally and in the Gaza Strip is not only a humanitarian situation. Of course, the humanitarian situation is very pressing, I would say, but still, the situation is not only humanitarian. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict in general should not be perceived and received as only humanitarian crisis. It is a political conflict, that Palestinians have been suffering from the Israeli occupation for the past 73 or 75 years. And there have been ongoing wars, since 1948, 1967, 1973, and the Palestinian Intifada, the first one, the second one, and then, the latest or the current genocide in Gaza committed by the occupying country, occupying Israel. I know your question is about humanitarian situation, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but I have to stress it is not only crisis. It's not only a humanitarian. It is also political conflict. Also, the current humanitarian situation in Gaza is not only a result of the current genocide. It has been going for the past 17 years. In Gaza, we have we have been living under Israeli siege since, for the past 17 years. And unfortunately, the Western media and the international media outlets in general portray the events of October 7th as if the starting point of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and this misleads and this informs the international public opinion, the international audiences learning and watching the Western media outlets. For the current situation in Gaza, like the Ministry of Health, the Palestinian Ministry of Health, yesterday declared that the number of people killed in Gaza exceeds 50,000 of people, and there are over 111,000 of people are injured. There are almost 14,000 of people missing, since the war, since the Israeli aggression on Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and since the war actually escalated in October 2023. So many victims so far remain trapped actually under rubble, making it very difficult to confirm the exact casualty numbers. There are numbers of killed people, the numbers of injured, the numbers of people trapped under rebels, the number of missing people as well. In Gaza, we have the number of people is almost like 2.3 million people in Gaza. And I would say the mass displacement of people in Gaza is very huge, is very incredible, and it is really very unbelievable. The Israeli military operations have forced families to flee firstly from the north of Gaza and Gaza City further into the south. And then after the ground invasion into the south, from Khan Yunis and Rafah, people have to flee again from the cities in the south. But at that time, people could not find anywhere to go. So fleeing the war to nowhere. The so-called safe zones are not really safe zones, because Israel targets people in their tents. Israel invaded the cities, and destroys also the hospitals, schools, the infrastructure, and this actually has led the Israeli aggression has led literally to a famine, to starvation. There is a big struggle now in Gaza, and this has been not only in the last month or in the last days when Israel resumed its attacks on Gaza. This has been going for the past 17 months. People struggle, with the severe shortages of food, clean water, medicine, fuel, and these are really very extremely scarce, while Israel imposing strict restrictions and limits. And actually, it's not only limits, it's blocking Israel. It blocks all the humanitarian aids in delivery in Gaza. And as I said, this has been going for 17 years. Of course, during the current genocide, it is much worse and worse and worse, and this has been worsening the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. As a direct impact of the humanitarian situation and the Israeli aggression, there is a collapse for the healthcare system in Gaza, in addition or alongside the educational system. These hospitals have been, as I said, destroyed, damaged, leaving thousands without access to basic medical care. We talk about the basic. care. Also, destroying schools, repurposing schools into shelters, destroying the 12 higher education institutions in Gaza. All these Israeli attacks and measures and procedures actually have led to the collapse of the education system, and thus we have a lost generation of students, of teachers, of academics, in general, of educational life in Gaza. Since October 7th, 2023, students, teachers, academics, researchers, and both primary and higher education have not attended schools or universities. Our children have been left for almost 2 years now, or for the past 17 months, without proper education. Of course, there were a few attempts here and there, but I would say the collapse of the education system, the Israel destruction of schools and universities have led to big challenges for our children and the students in Gaza. The essential infrastructure actually in Gaza also has been destroyed. Electricity has almost, well, actually, electricity is totally absent since October 7th. Like the people don't have electricity at all. The only way to have electricity, we rely on solar panels, and these are not available to everyone in Gaza. Finding a clean, drinkable water in Gaza is a big challenge. The sewage, the telecommunications are barely functioning, and this increases disease risk and, of course, worsening poverty levels among Palestinians. I would say now all people in Gaza suffer, poor or rich, intellectuals or not, common people or elites. Everyone in Gaza suffers from the Israeli genocidal war, which targets every single corner in Gaza. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza, of course, has been escalated much now after Israel resumed its war, its aggression, its attacks in the last week or the week before, when Israel resumed its attacks on Palestine. So the humanitarian crisis is huge in Gaza. It is an Israel's made catastrophe for the people. It is not a natural crisis. It is not made of earthquake or because of any natural circumstances. Israel has made the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, leaving the people without the basic needs and big challenges, to survive actually in the current situation in Gaza.
Sir, I was invited by University College of Applied Sciences in Gaza to speak on hope and resilience on 25th of March. It was decided 15, 20 days before. And because of the disruption of the ceasefire, obviously it had to be cancelled. Also, I don't know what I can teach Palestinians about hope and resistance and resilience. I think it's the other way around.
We always learn. I would say people have resilience in Gaza, have the determination to survive despite the big challenges they are facing. Um, we still have hope to rebuild our country and to establish our independent state. We still have, as I said, like the determination despite all the Israeli wars. Of course, the current war is the most devastating war. It is not the only one. In as I said, like in 2020, in 2022, there were Israeli military escalations in 2014, sorry. There was a 51-day war, like it was very also very devastating. In 2008, 2009, also people faced the Israeli aggression for 21 days. It is a long term occupation, and I think it is the longest occupation so far in the world. So all these challenges, all the Israeli aggression, I think have given the Palestinian the resilience, I would say, or we learned from these, like, to be resilient. And because the only way to fight the Israeli aggression is to have hope for a better future for our generation and for the next generation as well.
How do you get this hope? Is it how do you get this hope? Is it spiritual? It is religious? It is intrinsic? Because just listening to you was very difficult for me, and I'm sure for most of our listeners. At a personal level, what sustains? Is it
Well,
justice?
the hope comes from many resources. Well, from the belief in God that um, Palestine, our land, will be liberated. The hope comes from the people's resilience and determination for a self-determination and self governance in Palestine. The hope comes from the people's will to have a free and independent Palestinian state. The hope comes from the people's desire to have as I said, to have a better future, not only for for the next generation, but also for our generation. We learn from past. As I said, we have experienced many wars, and actually, since my mother was a child, she used to tell me she passed the Israeli forced displacement from our indigenous and our original villages in the so-called in the 1948 cities.
Yeah.
And then she faced the displacement in 1948, the first time, and then the second time in 1967. Then together with my father, she died, and she kept telling me, we lived, we survived, and we died in facing the Israeli war. So we learned a lot from our parents, our grandparents' experiences facing the Israeli aggressions. But still, this gives us the hope that at some point we will have our self-determination, we will have our own country, our independence, to live simply as every human being, as all people around the world. Now, this is like Israel occupation is the longest occupation in the world, or maybe in the history. We talk about 74, at least in the modern history. We talk about 74 years, and despite all the peace process negotiations and all the attempts to reconciliate and to find a political solution, Israel still committed its crimes against, against any solution, any, like the Palestinian Authority in Palestine, destroying all the agreement, even recently with the ceasefire agreement, which Israel signed also with Hamas, but Israel breached the agreement. Hardly, I would say, Israel committed to the first phase of the ceasefire deal or the ceasefire agreement with Hamas, with all the international pressure, which is very little, I would say, on Israel, but still, like the the second phase or the third phase of the ceasefire agreement have not been implemented, and
Yeah.
Israel keeps rejecting the ceasefire agreement, which again it signs with Hamas. And you can see like how Israel, this is just an example how Israel rejects and refuses any political solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel is just an occupying force, an occupying power, without believing in peace at all. Actually, yeah, before we, just before we started
Yeah.
our, recording the meeting, Israel bombed houses, schools, and neighborhoods in Beirut,
Yeah.
in Lebanon.
Yeah.
You can imagine, even though, Israel has signed a ceasefire agreement with Lebanon or mainly with Hezbollah party, and you still I think like to I don't know, we want to have or to see very serious international pressure on Israel, actually, let's say, to force Israel commit to the ceasefire agreements, to find a political solution rather than having only military solution. Israel believes, or at least the current Israeli far right wing government just believes in military solution. And as we learn from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Middle East wars, from all over, from the wars all over the world, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, um, maybe in other parts of the world, military solutions would never ever bring a solution.
Yeah.
Would never, because like at the end, if there is like military aggression, I don't say like all people, at least one group or two groups would react. And then the cycle of violence will continue. This is like the military solution would never ever bring any truce, any hudna, or any ceasefire or any investment. I would say for people, you know, it's not only for Palestinians but also for the Israelis. Not only for Palestinians and Israelis, but for the whole region, for the whole world. And you can see like how the situation in Gaza has not only affected the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or in Palestine, but now the whole Middle East is
Yeah.
burning. I would say is heating. Maybe it's more than heating; it's burning actually. Despite the authoritative regimes, and of course, but still, if you talk about at least from my observation, when I look at the social media platforms and how people, like comment, people share news, share materials, you can feel how the Middle East people, the Arab people, and I think also like if we talk about the general umbrella, the Muslim world, also it's like really burning, and this is now it becomes like a litmus test for um, for the international community to have a word now, to have a say, to say something against the Israel aggression. Even like like just a few days ago, I think like yesterday or the day before, Israel targeted the place or the residence of the International Red Cross Society in Gaza. And you can imagine this is an international organization. Most of our schools belong to UNRWA, United Nations
Yeah.
Relief and Works Agency, which is a UN agency. So this means that all the schools have UN flag, and Israel, and actually many of these schools have turned, as I said, into shelters for displaced people with UN flags. People thought that this would give them protection, but Israel destroys and targeted these schools while displaced people there. So there is no respect for any international organization, for UN agencies, for UN flag, for the international community. And you can now what I learn or what I know that the Western countries pressure, mainly the European countries, pressure for Israel for truce. But Israel does not care. And hopefully, with Trump's administration, this should be still Trump's administration give a green light to Israel to destroy Gaza and to further its aggression against people in Gaza. But I'm hoping that the only power that can stop Israel is actually the US, if they want. But as we can see so far, the US administration, Trump's administration does not want it, does not want to halt, if this is the right word, the whole situation in Gaza. And this, of course, escalates directly or immediately the humanitarian catastrophe and crisis in Gaza.
And how do you see the Western media portraying it?
It is catastrophic, I would say. There is no much change in the Western media treatment or coverage of the current war or the other from the other previous wars. The way how Western media manipulates the facts on the ground, taking into consideration the language used by the Western media outlets, the bias to Israeli narratives, the quoting or citation or referencing Israeli resources in covering the Israeli sites and ignoring the Palestinian voice or Palestinian news resources in their coverage. As in, I've been researching and working on Western media, mainly the US, German, and British media. And I say the Western media mislead their audiences. For example, they talk about the Palestinians as numbers. And this is rarely they talk about the stories of people. Now we have almost 50 or more than 50,000 people killed. Even one life matters. And talking about numbers would dehumanize people. Behind each number, there is a story. There is a person, there is a human being. There are people. It's killing. It's not death. Death of 50,000. It's not a natural death. It's killing. Talking about the events of October 7th as the starting point for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is also misleading the audience, because this indirectly ignores the political or the socio-political context of the Israeli siege and Israeli blockade. And you can see, now in the Western media, they don't talk about occupation. They don't address the roots of the roots of the struggle. They talk about October 7th and Hamas attacks on October 7th, 2023. They talk about the Israeli hostages, but we have 15,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons. They don't talk about them. And you can see how the unobjectivity in their treatment or in their coverage, referring to Israeli resources in a way or another, would adapt and adopt the Israeli narrative. But why don't the Western media talk to the Palestinian or find Palestinian resources? Now with the social media, with the advancement of information technology, it's very easy to reach people. There is no justification to conceal the Palestinian voice or to hide Palestinian resources with a justification that, journalists can't go to Gaza or to the West Bank or to Jerusalem. Of course, Israel blocks all the borders of Gaza, not only in the past 17 months, but also in the past 17 years. But still, I would say there is much bias in the Western media coverage towards Israeli narrative. I hope that this would be changed at some point, very soon, no later, so people can learn more and more about the reality and learn facts because the moral commitment of journalists and in general in journalism is to educate people, facts and reality as it is.
So our volunteer Fayaz is asking a question which I'll put it in a very simple way. Is Gaza, in your view, witnessing a new era of warfare where systemic denial of basic survival is being weaponized to break down the resilience of civilians?
Well, Gaza is not actually Gaza. I mean, of course, Gaza is now more devastated than other Palestinian cities in Palestine. Of course, what happens in Gaza is similarly happens also in the West Bank. There is destruction, house demolitions, and forced displacement of people of at least 3 refugee camps in the West Bank. So Palestinians, I would say, face Israeli genocide. And of course, it is a new era of conflict. The situation or the current circumstances and the Israel aggression will not only change the situation in Palestine, but I think in the whole Middle East. I don't want to exaggerate too much and say the whole world, because now what we see with the Trump's administration's politics and policies, there is a change in the global order and the change also in the word diplomacy. Back to Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and yes, Palestinians in Gaza face a new warfare, but as I said, we don't have anything apart from hope and resilience, and of course, determination for a better future and for self-determination in the future.
And my last question to you, sir, is that, and because I've seen this trend also in India, it's mostly Islamophobic, but anyway, the question is that how do you respond to when people say that every Palestinian is Hamas?
Well, thank you for this question because it reminds me with one way how the Western media um, represents and portrays the Israeli aggression or Israeli genocide. If you look at the headlines of the Western media, the only way they write their headlines and their reports is Israel Hamas war. This means that, the way they cover the war and represent or portray the war as if a war between Israel on one side and Hamas on the other side. What we see on the ground is like every single Palestinian civilian in Gaza is facing the Israeli genocide, the Israeli war, the Israeli attacks. On daily basis, at least 40 to 50 people are killed. So it is not actually a war against Hamas. It's a war against all Palestinians, including Hamas. To claim that everyone in Gaza is Hamas or pro-Hamas, also this is part of the disinformation campaigns that Israel and its aligned, its pro-media outlets in the West or maybe also somewhere else in the world, try to justify Israeli aggression, saying that or assuming that everyone is Hamas, and because of Hamas actions on October 7th, then this would, in a way or another, justifications for Israel to commit more crimes. But I would say, of course, Hamas is part of Palestinian community. Hamas is is a major part of Palestinian nation, but still, this doesn't mean that every single person is Hamas. Hamas won the election in 2006. It has the government for years, but still, in Palestine we have 34 Palestinian factions, with the major faction or the counterpart to Hamas is Fatah, and the Palestinian Authority, and of course the Popular and Democratic Front. So I don't claim, actually, to understand that, Israel is claim that everyone is in Gaza or in Palestine is Hamas is completely wrong and is very misleading, not only for the Israeli community or the Israeli public opinion, but also for the international public opinion as well.
So with this, thank you so much for the privilege of time, especially during the time of Ramzan, and gracing us with your presence. And for me, it was a very emotional experience to hear you, because whatever you were saying, I could see the images of it. Also, I would request everyone who is watching it, to not use it or to not politicize it. Understand it from the context of what this talk is, and do not use it for any political purposes, for your own propaganda, because we at Middle East Insights do not do that.